I think also nowadays I'm also learning about love of the divine, love of something that's higher than yourself, and and that's pure, and that's like really just channeling something. I was talking to you about before about how now I'm going through like a spiritual phase in my life. I'm writing all these poems, writing more than I've ever written, but I don't understand them. Maybe I'm not in the. I'm not the version of myself that understands those poems. I'm the version that writes it. A future version of me look back and be like, okay, I know what you were saying. But it's like I think even that thought process is me falling, like I said in one of the once the slipstream of a higher power is me allow myself to be taken forward in this version in this life of mine by something that knows more than I do about the path forward. So I want to ask you a little bit more also about faith also and the role that plays into your writing. What role has faith played not just in your life but also in your writing, and how does it, because you've got some parts, I mean the book titles also reference to it, some parts also here references that love and that seeking and that kind of like destination that you've arrived at. What's that been like?
Faith has played a really big role in my life and in my poetry. I feel like my poetry is an extension of what I'm experiencing. And I completely resonate with what you're saying, in the sense of like sometimes I write something and I'm like, why did I write? Like I don't know what it means. But then I think there's definitely a sort of trust in the process element to that too. But yeah, when it comes to faith, it's quite something to understand, or I don't know if I truly understand, but just to know that there is a higher power that loves you, that has your best interests at heart, that has this amazing plan for your life. And I don't know, it's kind of what you were saying about letting go, like surrendering. I think as humans in general, we all have a tendency to want to control things. And I really, really struggle with letting go because I like having control. I want to know what's going to happen. Like, I don't like surprises. Why would Lima go suspense? So, tell me, just reveal the path. Um, and so I'm very much this is the internal, now external because I've verbalized it, but this is like the internal. Just I like being in control. I find it quite uncomfortable to not be in control.
Mm-hmm.
But like you were saying about, did you say surrendering to the slipstream?
Yeah.
I think is important. I think it's important because I do believe that when you really surrender and like step back, you will find that we are guided by something that's higher than ourselves. I do think everything happens for a reason as well. And so I think you just have to trust in that guidance, but it's an active process. It's seeking, like you said. It's like you've got to seek that guidance and trust in that guidance. And I mean, they say faith is the substance of things unseen. And God damn. And I think it's true. I wholeheartedly believe that is true. I think that you will never ever know for certain where the path will take you. Like all that we will know, all that we know is what's happened. Like in our own lives, that's all we know. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. We can make plans, but plans change or unexpected things happen.
Exactly.
So just having that trust, having that faith in tomorrow, that in a tomorrow that you don't know, but just trusting God with it and letting go,
Mm-hmm.
it gives you a sense of peace. And I feel like finding that peace was a huge part of my journey in terms of this whole book, essentially. There's a poem right at the beginning, which is like, basically me saying, I want to be at peace. And yeah, towards the end of the book, I really just found that peace in my relationship with God. Just knowing that, God's got me. Like he's and so I don't need to worry about anything. There's someone who already knows what my tomorrow looks like. And no matter what it looks like, no matter the trials or difficulties, he's with me. I'm not alone. And so I can trust that even if it's difficult, there's always someone walking with me through the difficulties.
100%.
And there's light at the end of the tunnel.
100%. And this has been amazing. Like I'm still thinking about that line, faith is the substance of all things unseen. Oh my God. I wanted to finish off by asking this last question. I think it's important. I always ask people this question about meaning and life. And I want to kind of tinge it with poetry for you and see if obviously you might have two answers to the question. But the first part of the question is obviously, what does a poetic life mean to you? But also, what is the meaning of life? What is life itself? What is the journey that we're going on? What does that mean to you?
I don't know. So I'm going to do my best to answer.
And so you knew. I thought someone finally knew. I'm joking.
It's not me. What does a poetic life look like to me? I think poetry is in everything.
Mm-hmm.
But a poetic life, I'm trying to think about how I would define it. The life of a poet, maybe. I think is leaning into that inspiration that drives you. I think you've always got to be open. You've always got to be open-minded and not close yourself off, because inspiration, as I said, comes from all places.
Mm-hmm.
Poetic life. I think that often poetry, as I said, comes from your own experiences. So a poetic life, I would say, is just not just for a poetic life, but in general, just living life to the fullest that you can. Because, and just try and have the richest experiences, like the most enriching experiences that you can. I feel like that's just such an amazing thing to be able to do that. And with regards to inspiration as well, if you allow yourself to have those experiences, I do think you'll be inspired. In terms of the meaning of life, I'm going to ask you these questions as well, so you could struggle just as much as I am. For fun. In terms of the meaning of life, my faith has a huge part to play in terms of how I interpret that. I think the meaning of life is primarily to know God, to have a relationship with God. I also think everybody has gifts, and exploring those is important. But yeah, I think the meaning of life is founded in relationship with God first and foremost, and with others. I think it's less about material things. I think it's important to be, I think it's great to be ambitious and go after what you want. Obviously, I think that to make something of yourself, for sure, but I don't think that that's the meaning. I know you're hopeless romantics. They'll probably love it when I say this, but I think love is one of the most fundamental parts of life that we're so blessed to experience. I think it's Yeah, I think the meaning of life is rooted in relationship with God, relationship with others. What do you think? So, firstly, what do you think is the poetic life, and what do you think is the meaning of life?
First off, your answers are amazing, by the way. These are incredible. I was listening very intently because at some point I began to relate to what you were saying. I think my journey is very similar to yours. So to hear you, that's the answers you found. It gives me some comfort. First, for the meaning of life, first, I'm going to take something to steal your answer there. I think it's 100% true. I think I discovered that recently too. I've always known it. I've always been in a very religious family. But I guess the thirst for knowledge and understanding has led me to try and understand everything about the world. And I come right back to where I started, which is the understanding of God and understanding of scripture, especially understanding the wisdom that's there, but also knowing God and having a relationship. I think you mentioned that that's super important. I think that is the meaning of life, because I think everything else brings out from that. If you have everything in the world, but you lose your relationship with God, I think you're for a very, very difficult time. I think I've seen a lot of people, a lot of ambitious people go on that path and that journey for ambition, and they lose that relationship to God or themselves. I think, again, that is the same thing, right? Like, you lose a relationship to God, it means you lose a relationship to yourself, it means you lost a relationship to your family, because that's the only way to keep all those things in sequence. I think that's a truth that we found in the world. So I think this is kind of my goal to rediscover that in my life, even with all these things around me, still rediscover that relationship. A poetic life, I think the reason I asked that is funny too, because I think there is a way of being for a poet. There's almost, you have to live differently to everyone else. You have to look at things differently. You walking on the street and seeing birds flying, thinking of a sonnet in your head. Like, you can't go out to some random stranger and be like, did you also do that? Because they don't care about stuff like that. I think that's kind of what it means to always have that kind of childlike wonder about the world. That
I like
kind of like
childlike wonder. Yeah.
looking at things and just seeing it for what they are, and then letting yourself stay curious, even far into the future. I think that's kind of what we're trying to hold on to. Just like, just be like, oh, like I'm still myself. I think that's what I mean. It's the poetic life. We still try to find that connection to yourself. I'll be able to obviously verbalize it. I hope I never lose the ability to, to verbalize it and write it down. But also just even the feeling of it first off. Just having the feeling, being able to look at something and be like, that reminds me of the, the cocoon story you talked about. That reminds me of this thing going on in my life. And then, taking that process and, I also want to write. I also want to write books. I'm not there yet, but I hope I get there one day. When we're able to write books and share that with people and see if they relate to that. I think that's kind of what it is about. You were right. It's about relationships, in different factors, in different medias, in different ways. And so thank you also for this conversation, because this has been a poetic conversation. So
I really like your answers as well. To the poetic life one as well. I think, childlike wonder, curiosity, those are such fundamental things
100%.
to keep. Just in all that you do, really. So I like your answer better than mine.
No, I like yours as way better than mine. Like I'll say, I basically worked on your answer to make, so I copied your homework and just handed it in probably.